Thanks very much, Karen. And thank you for having me this afternoon. And I just want to start by saying I'm not an exercise physiologist. You've got plenty of exercise specialists and cardiologists that you've been hearing advice from. I'm a physical activity researcher. So my research is all about how do you get people more active and how do you design interventions that can work in schools and community settings and that can kind of be scaled up and make a difference over time. So I'm really interested in what can we do to make people change their lives, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. And it was great for me to actually sit in on a couple of sessions because I got a chance to listen to some parents in particular, some of the concerns that they're having around their children's activity levels. And what it comes across to me is that these are the same sorts of issues and challenges that all parents have, and Australian parents in particular. So my presentation is really going to talk a little bit about inactivity as a problem and guidelines, and then hopefully give you some strategies that will be of use. So this idea of physical inactivity, it's been described as a global pandemic. And this was to put this in context, The Lancet did a series in 2012, and considering the large scope of the problem across countries around the world, and it's no different in Australia. And because in Australia only 2 in 10 children and adolescents and 4 in 10 adults meet the physical activity guidelines. But what are those guidelines? And so I'm actually going to design something a little bit interactive to get you out of your postprandial slump. And I'm going to just give you a hint. It wasn't what Eve said the guideline was earlier today. What I'd like you guys to respond if you think the adult guidelines are 10 minutes a day, 30 minutes for youth, with the response, but it's actually a physical response. So if you think the answer is A, you need to stand on one leg. If you think it's B, half squat, C, air boxing, or D, a shoulder stretch. So up you get, out of your postprandial slump. So what do you think the answer is? All right, very good. All those people airboxing can sit down and smile because you got it right. Good job. Now, I'm showing you these guidelines because these are really appropriate for the Fontan population as well. So for children and adolescents, it's recommended that they do 60 minutes a day of MVPA, including some vigorous activity and some activity that specifically strengthens the muscles on at least 2 or 3 days a week. So few children meet these guidelines, as I've just highlighted, and part of the problem is the allure of screen time. And I heard one of the parents say today, how do you get kids more active? And their answer was, you switch off the TV. That's very sensible because we know that particularly screen-based entertainment is so attractive and seductive for children. So finding ways to limit screen time is actually within the Australian guidelines. Now, in regards to adults, it's a little bit less. It's 30 minutes a day or at least 30 minutes of moderate activity. And again, there's a recommendation that they should be doing strength-based activity. And there's also additional guidelines around reducing sitting time, particularly breaking up those long periods of sitting. Now, again, I'm a physical activity researcher, even though I'm very passionate about exercise. Exercise is just one small subdomain of the broader category of what is called physical activity. Now, if we think about physical activity as being any movement produced by skeletal muscles resulting in energy expenditure, we start to open our eyes to the broad range of things that we can do to help us meet those physical activity guidelines. Again, I heard a question earlier today about what is the intensity that we should be hitting towards and what does it actually mean when we talk about moderate intensity activity. It's really in that range of 55 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. And if to put that into a perspective into what might make more sense to you, it's about an intensity where you can maintain a conversation while you're performing that activity, starting to get a little bit elevated heart rate. When we move into the vigorous range, we're talking about sort of that huff and puff based activity that's really kind of, you wouldn't be able to talk and you're finding it hard to communicate. Now, this concept of physical activity with a Fontan circulation has been, I think, addressed in great detail for a number of years now, and Eves is very passionate about this. And certainly, if you want to go back and see some previous presentations on the actual efficacy and safety of exercise with Fontan, I encourage you to go back and watch Rachel's presentation from the last year or so. You'll find more information about the specifics of why that's the case. I was talking earlier with Eves today, and he said probably one of the strongest predictors of quality of life in adulthood is seen in those individuals who've had a very active lifestyle as a child, if they're living with a Fontan. So getting young people active now and into the future is perhaps one of the best investments that you could have in your child's life. And this particular review was looking at, in terms of the safety and efficacy of doing Fontan. The conclusion was, and I put this up here because I think it's a very powerful statement, there's no adverse effects related to training programs reported in the literature. Most studies reported benefits across various exercise parameters related to exercise tolerance in individuals living with a Fontan. So again, taking it from the experts who've been working in the space for a long time, it's certainly something that we should be encouraging young people to do, and as well as adolescents and adults. So we can safely say approved, and let's move on. But in terms of considerations, it has been brought up about the idea that in particular doing activity that's going to improve muscular fitness and strength, and particularly lean muscle mass, is going to help individuals living with a Fontan, because this helps with circulation. And as you can see in this diagram here, as this exercise and muscles are exercised, they help to push the blood back around the body and back to the heart. And this is why resistance training in particular is a really important exercise, and particularly a focus around higher repetition training. Now, this is again an interesting kind of question, because when I speak to parents of children and adolescents who have no heart problems or specific health issues, there's still a very strong reservation among parents to encourage resistance training in youth for the suggestion that it stunts growth or may have other adverse health effects. Now, again, the jury is in on that one. We can safely say that resistance training is very beneficial for young people, and we should be encouraging it. It's as we've now said, it's actually part of the national physical activity guidelines for Australia, for the US, for Canada, and the United Kingdom. Supervised and periodised training programs are safe, and certainly something that we'd be looking to encourage in young people. But the bigger issue I see anyway, it's not about whether you're doing exercise, it's how do you maintain exercise over time, and how many people are maintaining exercise programs or physical activity once they get started. And particularly exercise programs that tend to have a high level of dropout. Again, here's another opportunity for you guys to get up out of your seats and do a little bit of resistance exercise. I want you to stand up and respond to this one. What percentage of people drop out of exercise programs within a 6-month period? That's good. The answer is actually around 50%. Perhaps not, maybe your programs have a really good adherence and you do the right things. Now, see, this to me is where the challenge lies. This is like this exercise or activity or whatever we're talking about is such a wonderful pill, such a wonderful thing that people of all ages should be doing. How do we get people to stick to it over time? That is the really kind of pervading question in my mind. What we can do is look at evidence-based behaviour change techniques, and that's really what I'm going to finish this talk with. What are the things that you can do as a parent and as an individual to help you maintain an exercise activity program over time? Now, obviously, the barriers and the facilitators, or the things that stop you or the things that support you, vary by age, gender, and sometimes socioeconomic status. If we talk about children, I would really kind of summarise the barriers and facilitators into this idea of social and physical environment. So the parents and the setting and the school that they exist in are really the ones that dictate whether they're active or not. So the example that a parent said before about switching off screens, That's a perfect example. Is once you create the opportunity or provide the opportunity or make something happen, this is really where we need to be directing our energies. And now this is a paper that we published late last year called the Theory of Expanded, Extended and Enhanced Opportunities for Physical Activity Promotion. And it's as simple as this. There's that sort of behaviour change and motivational theories type of approaches really don't work very well with children. And the key to getting younger people active is creating the opportunity for them to be active. And as parents, that is maybe being active with them. At school, it might be creating recess and lunch break opportunities that kids can be active and are supported to be active. Paying for them to engage in organised sports, taking them to sports, encouraging them. It's really parents and teachers are the key to providing and creating those opportunities. And everything, and even things as simple as switching off a screen, it's a great step in the right direction of making those opportunities available. Once we kind of move to adolescence, it comes a more complicated and challenging process because we do start to then see a greater influence of psychosocial outcomes and predictors, and particularly motivation and poor body image. Now, these barriers, obviously at the other side, can be facilitators, and I suspect these are equally true amongst all individuals. Making the opportunities available, but also creating a positive social environment that young people feel comfortable and want to be active. In regards to adults, really lack of time tends to be the number one barrier. So finding things that are time efficient is obviously a really ideal opportunity and thing. Self-efficacy refers to confidence that you have, your perceptions of your skills and abilities to do it. Motivation and social support are really clearly very important factors as well. I just include one study up here, which is a really nice acronym called the TIGER study, which was looking at adherence to an exercise program in adults, in sedentary adults. And they were just looking to see how many of the 3 by 30-minute sessions a week they could do for 15 weeks. And they looked at a range of different factors that would predict whether or not these individuals stuck to the exercise program. And the things that really came forward were self-motivation, and self-motivation is sometimes also called autonomous motivation. Now, this refers to you doing it because you see the value in it and that those values and those outcomes are important to you. It's harder to kind of grasp that concept in younger children because they really just do things because they're enjoyable. But seeing the value of it is very important. Obviously, enjoyment links in with that. And then probably one of the key strategies or key factors of adherence was around behavioural strategies. Now I'm going to take you through what I mean by that, giving you what I think to be the 5 best tips from the literature that are going to help you and help your household to be more active. So the first one is about setting goals and tracking your progress over time. Thinking about what you want to achieve, what are the outcomes that you'd like to do. Are your outcomes or your expectations around number of sessions completed, or it may be a weight-related or even a fitness-related outcome. And writing these down and recording them is super important because you find yourself to be more accountable when that is the case, as you are more accountable when you're telling others. Obviously, there is a plethora of devices out there now that can help you to do all of these things, and I think probably many of you are using them as we speak. Have a plan and anticipate barriers. Now, this is kind of this idea of action planning, and it's about kind of seeing what barriers may come up and thinking about what you're going to do when they do come up, and thinking about having your strategies in place to support you to hit those targets and those goals. I would probably argue that social support, whether you are an individual or parent, is probably the number one for me in terms of promoting exercise adherence. If you are being active with a friend and you're committing with people to stay in a program, we know that is such a strong predictor of adherence over time. And then if you're talking about from a family context, this really talks to the idea of what we call co-physical activity. I speak to a lot of parents and say, my kids, they don't want to be active. And we say, well, what do you do? I say, well, I open the door and I tell them to get out there and run around. Does that sound familiar? What we've seen in our research is that actually parents and their children being physically active together, and this idea of reciprocal reinforcement where the child is responsible for the parent's activity and the parents are responsible for the child's activity, and there's this sort of double up effect. And so if I was going to give you one message about getting your kids more active, be active with them. It's important to be a role model, but it's even more important that you do things with them and finding things that they enjoy, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So I'm running out of time here. Designing cues for activity. So setting out your targets. Sorry about that. Setting up your targets and making sure that you can see things that remind you to have that activity scheduled and completed. That could be some notes and things. Digital alerts now make that even more easily available. The final point is about finding something that you enjoy, or something that your child enjoys. Now again, this was something that really came up with listening to parents talking today about the challenges, and particularly in Australian culture, where sport is such a strong part of a cultural identity, and it's obviously very difficult for children and adolescents with a Fontan circulation to compete at the same level of fitness as other children of their same age or sex. So finding activities that they're going to experience success in is absolutely essential, and it seems as though perhaps there will be social sport activities, but obviously things like swimming, climbing, gymnastics, things where they can compete against their own targets, their own goals, is probably going to be very reinforcing and enjoyable for a lot of them. And then finally, around making sure that there's variety in what we do and the opportunities that we provide, because these things we also know is a really important predictor of motivation over time and enjoyment. So with that is my final comment, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them.